I'm Canadian and I'm Greek as well, so I'm a mix of everything. I have been till recently with Trustly, like really recently, that's why we have the former. I've been in payments for 20 years, American Express and Trustly, and I've been in change management for 27 years, but in different types of companies. Having had my own startup in Canada, so I understand the pains or the excitement or the intent for growth or the planning for growth. Having worked for scale-ups, lots of excitement, you already have a business, you already want to grow it, but you have a lot of dreams, a lot of plans, but there is a lot of challenges, but also on the client side, a lot of times, the very large multinational companies or national companies, and those realities of how they operate, how they take decisions, how do they run their own business. You're here because you are either already operating in the UK, or you're planning to operate in the UK, or you're thinking about operating in the UK. And that makes a lot of sense. We believe, without wanting to be arrogant, that we are the strongest market in Europe. Not the largest one yet in terms of population, working on that, but definitely in terms of the power that exists in this country. So what I wanted to share with you is a few information about this ecosystem, this fintech ecosystem that you are considering or you are already actually operating into. What is it and how does it affect you? And I want to do this from the perspective of very much the how, being in the trenches, getting your fingernails very dirty, etc. The other speakers will have the opportunity to help you or give their knowledge or share their wisdom in terms of other hows, of how you position your company, how you attract the capital, etc. And then tomorrow when we have the panel, I can definitely looking forward in terms of any discussions about the competency side of things, how you plan, how you put your plans together, how different it is in the UK versus other countries. So basically, this is an ecosystem that is huge, and that is important. I can throw numbers. There's some numbers here which you, in 30 seconds, you'll forget about them, and that's fine. But there are 2,500 companies. Probably by the end of this year or early next year, there's going to be 3,000 plus. What does that mean? Well, apart from being a large, significant number, nothing more than that, but it is big. What is more important is what is behind that. It's actually a proven sector that generates around 11 billion annually. That attracts attention. First of all, it attracts attention by the government. The government is interested about fintech, wants to understand fintech, wants to support fintech, wants to actually grow it. And that, in this country, we consider as something positive. So having actually a focus by the government is not something negative, it's something very positive that will continue actually growing the sector in the future. The other thing, as was already mentioned, is that the presence of fintech as a cluster, as a segment, as a group of segments actually, spans the country. That's extremely important. One of the things that is being a lot in the political agenda, and it's not about parties, it's about what is being discussed, what is being analyzed a lot, is the leveling up. The differences between our London and Southeast reality, where the money, the wealth, the activity is much more dominant than the other areas of the country. Fintech is one of those segments that actually is present pretty much everywhere. And that's very important, again, from a government lens, from a government perspective. So actually, there is a target by the government. They want to go and grab a higher share of the global fintech business. Ultimately, they want to support more and more companies to be present, more and more companies to support the market, more and more people to be employed. Which means great news for you that you want to be able to be present, sell your products and your services, and grow the business. Some areas are stronger than others. There is a lot of legacy from lending. There is a lot of strength in payments, And there is also a lot of strength in wealth management, wealth tech, and I'll explain what this is, including crypto. At the end of the day, there is a value attached to fintech in the UK. So yes, fintech is precious, and it actually attracts a lot of talent, it attracts a lot of capital, it attracts a lot of support, it attracts a lot of development. And that development comes from the startups, it comes from the legislative side, it comes from the regulatory side. And that aspect of the regulator being your friend and an enabler to grow the business is something that in a lot of other countries sounds like an oxymoron. Here, actually, in a lot of the subsegments in the fintech, and I'll mention some of those, the role that the local regulator plays actively is one of providing clarity, providing definitions through the rules of the game, and in the role of an enabler of opening up that segment. And that's great, actually. Maybe frustrating at the beginning for some, for few, for incumbents, usually for the larger players. But for the fintech, for the typical fintech company, it's actually a very welcome role. So I would say that one of the things that is interesting for the UK fintech ecosystem is that you do have, as a driver, the government in a very strong way. You do have the capital, that's obvious, I don't have to talk about it. You are in the city or in the part of the city that represents that. You do have the expertise, but as we said, spread out around the country. You do have a country that is a center of innovation, so you can actually take a lot of this newer technology or whatever it is and come up with value propositions, create products, create solutions out of them. And you do have a regulator who actually enables you to do so. And on the fin side of the fintech, that's critical. Some of these areas, and this is the way, this is not I've tried to actually bring things that are not, they don't represent my interpretation of what is fintech, how it is. This is all from a review that the government asked Deloitte to do. It's called the Khalifa Review. It took place last year. It's very much around where should the country focus in the next 3 to 5 years, and how can it actually support actively fintech. So this is the level of activity that we're talking about. So the definitions that they gave, and this is in terms of how many companies are per category or per area of activity, wealth tech, everything around trading, around investments, that includes crypto, around personal finance management, and everything goes around that. So solutions, platforms, operations, very large sector, and a sector that will grow significantly over the next 2 to 3 years. That's based on the funding, that's based on what the investors want, that's based on what the technology needs. Payments, and I can talk a long time about payments, will not. We are moving from open banking into open finance, and that creates links between the first two. It's a real exciting time if you are in payments, and then this does not mean that you have disruption of the old, more established ways. This is enriching and growing the options that consumers or small businesses have in the area of payments. Again, whether this is automation or change the business model. Banking, and of course neobanks have been darlings of in the fintech world, especially in this country, but not only. And here we're talking about anything around personal accounts, the information behind it, and what do you use, how do you use that, and how do you actually change the way that you manage your own personal finances. Lending, and that has the track record for many years now, including areas such as P2P and other applications. RegTech, for a lot of people, this is a massively exciting area because on one hand you have things that are difficult to handle, like AML and KYC, but behind them there's a lot of value, there's a lot of money to be made. But beyond that, you have actually credit scoring, you have compliance, and fundamentally you have data management, secure data, ID management, etc. So a lot of work that goes into this space, automated contracts, etc. Business banking, and I think this is an area we expect a lot of growth in this country, in the Fintech cluster, because traditionally first you go after consumers and later on you go after SMEs. There are already solutions for SMEs, and there is a lot of scope for growth in this space. InsurTech, it comes low in the list, but actually the amount of activity behind InsurTech and the kind of hockey stick position in that curve is very exciting. And there's a lot of room for growth. This is a country that has very large players, so the disruptive agenda is very relevant and has a lot of potential. And finally, something that's very specific here, in some countries also, but not in all countries in Europe, quote aggregators, and the ability to provide the consumer or to enable them to compare. And there is business and money to be made from that. This is a slide that was presented last year, actually, and I took it. There's a lot of resources. You can go through each one and spend 20 minutes, which I'm not going to do. But you're coming into, or you're operating in a country that has a lot of resources available. And actually, there's more that are not even on the slide, and I'll explain. It may come as a surprise, hopefully less so after what was mentioned earlier, that the government is so active and so relevant to understand the activity going on in the ecosystem. This may not actually impact your day-to-day activity or your plans to enter and expand into the market, but it is actually an enabler to grow the sector. It is an enabler to facilitate the growth in a lot of the subsegments we saw. The regulator, there are many regulators here, which enables a lot of subsegments to actually get rules, get definitions, and move forward. Of course, capital, I'm saying of course because that's an obvious one. Much more about skills and talent. There are many ways to find skills and talent, and it's not just London, as we mentioned. And definitely the community aspect. One thing that is not there is the associations. If you're in insurances, there are insurance-related associations, and they are also taking initiatives to actually create networks, bring people closer, help you understand how things operate in this country, which may be different than from where you come from, and create a lot of the necessary activity that is worth you linking with them, etc. Finally, where is this heading? At the end of the day, because of the sheer numbers and the interest, there is an expectation of a very significant growth translated into actually business happening, people getting employed, companies being set up, growth happening, etc. So that is something that is an expectation, I would say, from all of those players. Another factor that is very much, if we look at it, it gives us an indication about the future, is the move from open banking into open finance. In the UK, we are firm believers that we have the best API definition for open banking, or perhaps the best implementation in Europe, and that enables speed into going out and creating solutions that we can sell out. Great. Can we replicate that into open finance? I think it's a bet that the country will win because of where it has started with in open banking. So that if you are actually operating that space or planning to, you have to understand what's going on, become familiar, and become part of it. The third one that is very much in terms of future outlook, it's really critical as well. In the UK, we call it smart data as an initiative, but essentially it's a term that encompasses a lot of elements about data management, secure data management, exchanges with third-party providers who cover definitions, protocols, etc. But also the very key subject of ID management. So as we're moving to the future, can I have my basic information as an ID in a digital space, and can that be understood and carried around from provider of services to provider of services, etc. And do we have actually the legislative aspect around it that ensures that this data is understood, protected, and enabled to be used? Fourth one, which I'm just going to mention but not going to detail, is the AI and the regulation around the AI. And this is a country where there is a key interest about it, and there is a lot that will come out of that, let's say, initiative and activity that is going on. It's not necessarily what's going to drive directly fintech companies and results, but it will influence a lot of the solutions that we'll see in the next few years. And finally, crypto. Crypto, you're in one of the centers, one of the main centers of crypto activity. We do expect more regulation. There is a very clear intent for that. That will create clarity. It's not the only center globally, but from a regulatory perspective, it's one of the main ones. All put together, create a cluster of a lot of activity into the future. I just had a couple of howevers, just to have the however. There is an unknown about will there or will there not be divergence, regulatory divergence with the EU. If I am to bet, I would say there will be. Will it be substantial? Will it be really affecting our fintech businesses? I don't think so. I think there are reasons why this divergence is important on the political agenda, but it's not. There is a major question. There's a lot of debate about it, both on the banking side, but also on the fintech side, as to whether this is going to go far enough to actually raise questions, create gray zones, risk results. Based on what I've told you about the priorities in this country for growth, I think there will be divergence, but I don't think it's going to be material to actually create issues, business issues. And finally, remember one thing, you are in a space that you're in a country that is post-Brexit. I used to say Brexit and lower the tone of the voice. We're done with that, but there is licensing. So if in your cluster you have licensing, get yourselves in the queue and get licensed. Whether this is because you have to have a complete bridge entity with its license, or because by definition you cannot operate without it. Make sure you go. It's a long process. It's a little bit tedious, like most licensing. It's not necessarily difficult, but it takes time.
Thank you.